You can raise your hand and tell me who Hagar is. Who is Hagar? Okay, Donna, I saw your name go up.
Somebody's
And
wife.
Donna?
She's the slave of Sarah, who is the mother of Ishmael. And so she basically is the surrogate. She steps in for Sarah when she can't have any children to have a child, and that doesn't work out so well. But yeah, so
Yes. Okay.
yes
So
and no.
so Hagar is well known in Jewish literature, rabbinic writings, even in, if you go to most rabbis, I'm not attacking rabbis, some of my best friends, but they don't really understand that the Hagar they meet is a post-biblical expansion. It's commentary on the Torah, but it isn't in the Torah. Okay? And Hagar has been maligned by many within the rabbinic literature, and she has come across as a fairly negative person. We have let me just make something clear, which is really weird. The Quran, which contains many stories about the founding of Islam and so forth, is not the same as the biblical material. Most people don't get that. So they look at the Quran and they assume that the Quran reflects material contemporaneous with the Torah. It's not. Here's a question. What is the Quran? With what is the Quran contemporaneous? Any thoughts?
600, 700, I don't know.
Talmud.
Well, it's not far, Donna. The Quran is post-biblical. And one of the great mistakes that scholars or pseudo-scholars make in studying the Quran is to draw parallels between what the Quran says and what Genesis says, except they're from different eras. And the Quran is, in fact, if you permit the use of the term, is a midrash. And it's a midrash on rabbinic materials. And so when pseudo scholars, that was rude, when pseudo scholars try to draw lines between what the Quran has to say about the founding of Islam and so forth, and early relationships with the Jewish people, and they want that to be what the Bible has to say. But it isn't. It isn't. And people who want to understand the Quran have to understand the Quran as a midrash on the rabbinic materials and on the biblical materials. Did that make any sense to anybody? Do you get that? It really, it changes the way we read. As a matter of fact, we used to do in the old days interfaith dialogue. So many of the local rabbis who would get engaged in interfaith dialogue were drawing lines between the Quran and the book of Genesis. No, that's not how it goes. And so it's a lot of fun. Steve?
But in some cases, I mean, I think it is more direct and parallel. I mean, they take some of the stories in the Torah, and as you've talked about how the Torah has been sort of adjusted to make Jerusalem prime, they take the stories, and I don't know that it's midrash, they like just massage them. So the story of Joseph is a little bit different. The story of Ishmael is a little, they twist them to put the focus on the supremacy of Islam that they're trying to advocate.
I think that's fair, but it is midrash. It is fair to call that midrashic writing on the rabbinic midrashic writings on the Torah. So it's already a couple of steps beyond just reading a text. So we're going to go on. When you hear the name Ishmael, okay, what does that bring to mind? What does that bring to mind? Ishmael. Who was he? What was he? Who's Ishmael?
Moby Dick.
I actually heard that. Okay? And I forgive you. Ooh, okay, Cindy.
He's the firstborn son of Abraham and the patriarch of the Muslims.
His mother was
Hagar.
Hagar. And
Yep.
Hagar was
The handmaiden or slave of Sarah.
an Egyptian slave of Sarah. And in the story, if you read the story of Genesis carefully, you find that originally she was Sarah's servant, in that sense owned by Sarah, but Sarah relinquishes her claim to make it possible for Abraham to be the father of Ishmael, since he has no kids. That worked out fine until Abraham had a kid. And then the trouble starts. Okay. Was Sarah, please, Tamara.
Let me jump in. When Sarah gives Hagar to Abraham or Avram, she gives her as wife to Abram. So Hagar is both the slave of Sarah and the second wife of Abraham. And that to us seems very strange, but in the ancient world, that was fairly common. And we actually have marriage contracts and documents from 2,500 years ago, Jewish ones, in which a woman who is a Jewish man's slave is getting married with a free Jewish man. And she stays a married wife and a slave for many years. So in our story, Hagar is both. And that complicates the whole situation.
Boy, does it complicate. So, for example, if you read the text carefully, after Sarah passes away, Abraham remarries Hagar. Wait a minute. You can't do that in Jewish law. You know, wives are not exchangeable. And you know, you divorce one, you don't go right back and, you know, with a little bit of bubble gum, put it all back together. You don't. So the role of Hagar is very controversial and very, very convoluted. So she's there, she's slave, she's Egyptian, she's the mother of Ishmael, she gets into trouble. Why does she get into trouble? What happens? Please, Cindy.
She kind of mocks Sarah because she was able to get pregnant, and Sarah, up to that point, hadn't been able to be pregnant.
So this is a whole terrible thing. Ha ha, Sarah, you're my mistress. I'm pregnant. You're not. Okay? And pregnancy was a status and it was a privilege. And so she zapped Sarah. So we now know that Hagar was not a nice person. Or was she? Or was she? What about Ishmael? Was he a good guy or a bad guy? Ishmael, found in the Torah, this portion, actually in last week's Sedra. Ishmael comes across negatively, but only by rabbinic interpretation. The rabbis dump on Ishmael, and they do it to make certain that everyone understands that Ishmael, the son of Abraham, cannot be the replacement for Isaac. So when you read the Torah, be wary, because you are actually in the middle of a battle. A battle. Who is Ishmael? What's his connection to the Jewish people? And who are the legitimate heirs of Abraham? And it's, believe me, not clear. Not clear. Steve.
This story is so convoluted. Are there other similar stories contemporary to these ancient times that this is taken from?
I can't answer that question, Tamara. Can you?
I cannot think of any that would be a family story like this. Some of the Greek mythology would have complex family dynamics about gods and goddesses and their children and struggle, but not from Mesopotamia. They probably were, but they were not preserved. So this is quite unusual. And what's really unusual is, when we look at it closely, is how sensitive it is to real complexity. It's really not simplistic at all. So that, and I'm jumping ahead, but when you read it carefully, you can develop sympathy for every one of the people in the family. Abraham, who is caught between two women and God, Hagar, who is trying to have a life, and Sarah, who's trying to protect her place in the face of a rising young woman in the household. And it's negotiation, family dynamics, negotiations. And they're not that different from negotiations that current families sometimes go through when there are children from different parents living together and trying to work out an equitable family life. So what's genius about the story is how sympathetically it portrays all the characters.
So that when you're done looking at the book of Genesis and the stories of Sarah, Hagar, Ishmael, Isaac, okay? The comment that Tamara made is critically important. Every one of them has a good side. Every one of them did something which was seen as correct and helpful. So to take Hagar and make her a villain is to misread what the Torah is talking about. And you now know more than many of my colleagues regarding Hagar, okay? Because it takes a little bit of understanding. I have compiled here with a little bit of additional support, a little bit about Ishmael and Hagar. So Ishmael, heard by God, beloved son, expelled son, dying child. Mighty huntsman, prince, chieftain, father, faithful son to his father who had abandoned him. Okay, so that was nice. Then Hagar, catch this. Hagar is the first person in the Bible to flee oppression. She ran from Sarah. Remember? Sarah oppressed her in some way. She ran. So she gets number one on that. She is the first person who a messenger of God visits, the first woman to receive an annunciation, the only woman to receive a divine promise of future generations, descendants. The first woman in the ancestor stories to bear a child, the first surrogate mother, the first slave to be freed, the first divorced wife, the first, catch this one, single parent. Whoop! The first single parent. Think about that, okay? Let's see. The first person to weep. If you look back in the Torah text, this is so strange when I hit this. She is the first person to weep. It's amazing. And given all these distinctions, Hagar is a presence in the rabbinic and biblical materials in ways that nobody else is. And we treat Hagar kind of casually, and she deserves better. Excuse me. I'm going to have to break in the brilliant chain of my thought by fulfilling a promise that I made in the 1960s to a survivor of Kristallnacht. This gentleman grabbed hold of me and said, "You must remind your congregants every year of Kristallnacht, November 9th, 1930. You are to remind them. And I am fulfilling now my promise that as long as I'm around, Kristallnacht will not fail to be mentioned in Jewish studies." Okay? That's just a brief intervention. Howard? No, not hearing you. Howard?
Sorry,
Howard!
sorry. Do we know that Hagar is an Egyptian and not somebody who that Abraham brought from Ugarit or where the hell he came from, or of the Chaldees?
Now, I'm sorry to get your question clearly. Do we know that Hagar was not one of the people brought by Abraham?
As opposed to being an Egyptian.
Yeah.
I can just tell you she's named, known, labeled as Egyptian, and the separation, the ethnic separations that we make such a big deal about were not the same big deal in the early biblical material. Okay?
Yeah.
Please, Tamara.
It says so in the Torah, in Genesis, that she was Egyptian, 61, and Sarai, is the wife of Abraham, didn't birth him a
Oh,
child.
Egyptian. Oh, I see. Okay.
And
Sorry.
yeah, and presumably she was, it's interesting, presumably she was given to Abraham when they all were in Egypt. And Abraham and the king sent them home with slaves and cattle and gifts. So she was actually a gift from the Egyptian king to Sarah.
Okay, that's great. Sukasa.
This may be a naive question, but since at the time we were a patrilineal people, why isn't Ishmael Jewish?
Any other questions? Yeah.
Can
Okay.
I jump in? One of the really interesting things is that even though patrilineal seems to be carried on, Genesis, with, as you said, Genesis here and Genesis 17 makes a very important point that the mother makes a difference. So it has to be Sarah's child that the promise goes through. And actually, Abraham is asking God the same question. Why can't I just keep Ishmael? I don't need any more children. And God says, no, it's going to be through Sarah.
So God is the intervening force here, and God makes all the decisions that construct the Jewish future. Do not treat this as incidental.
Who was Kristallnik? You were mentioning Kristallnik, and I would ask you who that was, Rabbi. I don't know.
So the role of the woman, the role of the man in the determining of the flow of position within the Jewish people reflects the struggles of the time and not the will of God. And I remember the debates at the CCR convention dealing with matrilineal, patrilineal, matrilineal, patrilineal, which is the authentic way to view Jewish descent. Answer? Yes, that's the answer. Patrilineal, matrilineal, it depends upon the generation of teachers, and it depends upon their particular point of view. None of this, do not quote this. None of this is biblical writ that it has to be. And I remember the debates on the floor of the CCR convention, and I rarely took part in them because they were very often silly. The rabbis quoting God and making it clear that it's either matrilineal or patrilineal. These same rabbis will go out and have a bacon sandwich. But here, that was rude, okay? But I'm allowed at this age, it doesn't matter. They made reference to God and used God to prove what it is they wanted to have. And if you pay attention to the battles now over matrilineal, patrilineal, and those battles are still going on. People are still quoting God and proving which one is right by quoting God. They don't live that way. They don't observe that way. But when it comes time to making a debate point, boom, back into traditional Judaism. Cindy.
I don't know if the concept that the birthright goes to the firstborn son, but I'm a little confused why 2 out of our 3 patriarchs were the second-born son.
That's such a nice question. They're not, right? Abraham, firstborn son, Ishmael. That didn't work. What about all of Jacob's kids? And Jacob's kids didn't get status by virtue of their birth situation. There were other things that intervened. How did Judah ever emerge on top from that messy family arrangement? Okay? Because the material in the Bible was written by the time Judah was a dominant tribe. And so they had to find a way to connect Judah into being the best. But that's only because Judah was the power at that time, the tribe. I don't know, Tamara, do you want to answer more completely than I just did?
No, well, one of the things you said, the writer who is coming from Judah goes through the stories and privileges the younger one, precisely because what you said, Cindy, the norm was the firstborn is the leader, and the Bible trying to justify a different thing shows that from the beginning, it was no longer the first born. Even with Adam and Eve, right? Cain was the firstborn. And humanity, the better part of humanity comes from the third. David is the youngest child. So that conflict is part of the biblical agenda. And you put your finger on it. So thank you.
Yes, that's true. And may I point out, are you ready to be really uncomfortable? No? I see a lot. No, I am not ready to be uncomfortable. Don't do that. Okay, so the Christian claim to inherit all the promises of Abraham and so forth sidestep the firstborn. When this happens, the whole world turns upside down. Is the Christian world the firstborn creation of the Jewish people? Or is that an anti-Semitic jibe trying to knock Jews off of their position? Donna's very happy today. Why, Donna?
I'm just saying the answer is yes. Yes and yes.
So when it talks about the firstborn son, the firstborn everything, Christians have a claim that they're the firstborn. And Jews have a claim. And which one is right? Let's get this correct. Which claim is accurate?
How do Christians claim they're the firstborn? I don't get it.
Okay. Which one? Okay. Steve and another raised their hand. Steve, where are you? Okay.
Isn't, oops, isn't
I
up
didn't
to answer that question. My question is, deep within Judaism is this notion, repair the world, don't accept things, question. Does that in any way relate back to all of these struggles about, okay, well, traditionally in the world it's this, but maybe it doesn't need to be so, and we should question and decide how to move forward? I mean, it seems to be built into our DNA.
As a rabbi, a teacher of religious subjects, one who is in direct contact with the spiritual world, I will tell you that that's heresy, because we can't leave that to the people. History determines who are the winners and who are the losers in all these encounters.
But we all get to question.
You all get to question, and the answer is always, that's interesting. The whole debate, Steve, oh my God, the thousands of people who died in the course of these debates is based upon a willful interpretation of a text that doesn't say what they wanted to say. And if you go back and look at all of this, you will understand, you Steve, know that it doesn't work that way. The winners are determined by history. The winners are determined by who prints the most books. The winners are determined by the ones who do the most conversion and outreach and stuff like that. But to say at any circumstance, oh, we Jews are the chosen ones of God, to me, is outrageous.
I
Okay.
actually wasn't saying that.
Hey, 10 of you just dropped off the program. Okay. Come back.
That is, I actually, that isn't what I was trying to say, but that's okay.
Okay. Please, Donna.
Well, I agree that the real reason is that they had to justify what was the actual truth, that, like Judah was the one who was in power. So let's figure out a story so that that makes sense. But I think it's so interesting that it's always not the firstborn in many, many contexts. And I think that in a way you can take the lesson from that it doesn't matter who's born first. It's what matters is who has the right qualities. What do you do with yourself? Not just, oh, I happen to be born first. So that's
You'll never be an Orthodox rabbi, Donna. I'm sorry.
That is for so many reasons.
Brad has his hand up.
Huh?
Brad has his hand
Brad.
Oh, yeah, I was going to try to respond to Howard's question about the Christian claim. I wonder if it has to do with the whole idea of the Immaculate Conception, so that Christ was the firstborn without original sin.
Yeah, that took a lot of work too. That took a lot of work. If we are going to be scholars of Bible, we have to be willing to look at the text as it is and try to strip away the additional elements which are purely there for the sake of argument. What connects me to my Jewish identity is not birth order. It's not even the selection of who comes first in God's eyes. For me, what makes Judaism extraordinary is its moral base, is its ethical commitment, is the way in which it says we've got to fix the world. And the more people veer from that and talk about other matters, they miss the point. And that's a serious question. There were some hands up. I want to, because we're running.
We're okay.
We're okay. There's some hands up. Tamara, would you like to comment on Hagar as an exemplar of Jewish women? What do you think?
I never thought of Hagar as exemplar of Jewish women, because I don't associate her with Jewish women. So I'll have to think about that. But I know that her story, which for some people seems upsetting and harsh, I know from work that I've done that African American women, for example, do find a lot of comfort and strength in the story of Hagar because of some of the things you said. She's a woman who suffers and endures. She is tenacious and so on. But I don't associate her with Jewish women.
You don't.
Are also tenacious and who also suffer, but it's a different story. I like to think of her as the mother of the Muslims and the Arabs, specifically in the Bible, the mother of the Arabs. There are no Muslims yet, and not all Muslims are Arabs, but maybe I can jump in and say 2 words about Hagar in the Islamic tradition, because her story is there. In our story, she's expelled with Ishmael because Sarah is afraid of what will happen to Isaac, to baby Isaac, when she dies. And here is a young woman with her teenage son. And so she wants to protect Isaac and tells Abraham, send away the handmaid with her son, so he will not inherit with my son. And Abraham does that. So many of us feel very guilty because we are children of Sarah, and Sarah has done such a painful thing. Although God says to Abraham, do what she tells you. Listen to the voice to her voice, and I will protect Ishmael. So Abraham does. But in the Islamic tradition, that story is very different and very similar. It's similar in that Hagar and Ishmael are in the desert with no water, and Hagar cries in desperation. But how she gets there is radically different. Sarah has nothing to do with the story. One day, Abraham takes Hagar and Ishmael to where the Kaaba is, the holiest place for Muslims, and drops them there and walks away. And there's nothing there, no water, no people. And Hagar says, hey.
Excuse me, that's the father of our people who just did that. I wanted to point that out. Okay, please go ahead.
So Abraham does that, and Hagar calls on him, what do you mean you're abandoning us here? He just keeps walking. And finally she says, did Allah tell you to do it? And he says, yes. And she says, okay, then I'll know it will be all right. And after trial and tribulation, when she watches the child suffering because they ran out of water, she runs frantically back and forth. And to this day, the Muslim tradition when they go to the Kaaba, part of the ritual is to go back and forth around the journey that Hagar did. But Sarah has nothing to do with this. And then an angel does show up, water comes out, and all is well. And Abraham comes and visits periodically. So it's a different story with no guilty Sarah whatsoever.
But
So
Sarah has no role in the Quranic story.
in this story, she's a very good woman, and they praise her as Abraham's wife, and they praise Hagar as Abraham's wife, but neither is a villain. So
one of the things, Tamara, that grabbed me as I was preparing with you last night is the connection between Abraham and Ishmael. That is, in some ways, a beautiful story. That Abraham travels with Ishmael and is responsible for the Kaaba, or the religious structures around the centerpiece of Islam. And Abraham is there with his son. And the interactions are very, very positive. And that's just not what I was accustomed to hearing. But the real connection, the loving father, Abraham becomes the loving father in relationship to Ishmael, according to the Quranic tradition. What does all this tell us? What are you thinking when you hear things like this? What are you thinking?
Rabbi, I have my hand up.
Okay.
I just want to mention with the beautiful story you're telling. I saw on America's Got Talent Israelis and Palestinian children in a music group together on national TV singing together for peace. So in this modern age with all that's going on, there is hope because the kids want peace. Not everybody does, but they do. I just want to bring that up. That's what's
Okay. So what do we learn from the manner in which Abraham appears with Ishmael, Abraham appears with Isaac? What do we learn about our biblical stories? What are we learning? It's very important to ask these questions.
We're family. We're half brothers and sisters.
Okay, Donna? Donna?
What
Shapiro?
I find interesting is that you've got the same characters. They're given different qualities in these two versions, but it makes you think that, wow, there must be a grain of truth here somewhere, because why is this group of people writing a story with these same exact people? Or why are they taking on what the Torah says is that, okay, that Ishmael is the father of the Arab people, but
Right.
why are they taking the Torah as their authority? It's kind of interesting. I don't know. Anyway, I'm not
using.
You know, origins are so very important.
Yeah, it's that they're writing the story to make themselves feel like we're the ones, we are the chosen ones. And so they change the story so that it works out that they are the rightful heir. And that's why we keep fighting about it.
And that's why when I read these stories, I am not interested in historical accuracy. I am interested in moral and ethical accuracy. What are the values being celebrated? Some of the people were very far from being good people, but there are values in the stories. And those values are that which kept the Jewish people alive. They came to the values. Why did they study about Isaac? Why is any of this? You want to talk about miserable people? How about good old King David? You know, good old King David. What a wonderful man, a moral man, an adulterer, and a rapist. And but he could have been president of the United States. No, I'm not going to. But
God bless you, Stanley.
he if you created a diagram on the blackboard, who will be our great king, who is the progenitor of the Messiah? Oh, would David even have been on the list? Would he? No. He wouldn't have made the list. And what Jewish tradition does in a natural way is to celebrate the goodness and to set aside the ugliness. I have to make a jump right now because I did not print the Kaddish list, and I have to go do that while we're still on. And Tamara, do you want to please, first of all, working with you was very demanding yesterday. As in when Tamara says, well, we know that. I don't know that. But it was a privilege and a pleasure. And we so look forward to being with you this one time. But Tamara, I'm giving them back to you. I will reappear with the Kaddish list.
To do, I can share the screen for a minute and have you look at the text that I was referring to. It talks about, now it's not actually from the Quran, but it is from the Hadith, which is the equivalent of the Talmud, we might say. And you see how Abraham brought her and her son Ishmael while she was suckling him to a place near the Kaaba. Think about it. The Muslims continue to celebrate Hagar's story. The holiest place in their life is Hagar. Also, amongst the things that Hagar is in the Torah, she's the only woman who has a place name named after her experience. In chapter 16, when she has experience of the angel, she says, she offers a prayer for the God who sees me, and she acknowledges God. And so the well is called Be'er Lachai Ro'i, the well of the God who sees me, after her naming of her experience. And when Isaac comes to meet Rebecca, he comes to meet her from a place called Be'er Lachai Ro'i. So she makes her mark in a very moving way. Anyway, nobody was in Mecca. He made them sit over there and place near them leather bag containing some dates and a small water skin containing some water, and set out homeward. Ishmael's mothers followed him. Hey, Abraham, where are you going, leaving us in the valley where there is no person whose company we may enjoy, nor is there anything. She repeated that to him many times, but he did not look back. Then she asked him, has Allah ordered you to do so? He said, yes. And she said, then he will not neglect us. So she's a woman of faith. And then as I said, she has been a model for people who have been oppressed, especially women and children who felt abandoned. And her story and God caring for her and promising her has offered that to countless of people who read the story from the point of Hagar, not the point of Sarah. But I am a fan of Sarah as well, because she refuses to relinquish her position. She is a woman who takes care of her child and protects him. Abraham is going to have 8 children total. He has Isaac, he has Ishmael, and he's going to have 5 more, I guess 6. But in our story, we're the children of Isaac and of Jacob. And I turn it back to you, Rabbi Stan. And unfortunately, I have to leave because I have to be somewhere else. But I'll wait.
Okay, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I am now going to read the names of those who have passed away the past month. Melvin Adler, Susan Kaplan, Phyllis Cassell, Edith Krieger, Irit Krieger, Audrey Pekelny, Miriam Reisman, Fuad Salem. And those whose yortzites occurred, those whose yortzeit have occurred during this past week. Sarah Nazarian, Achterzad, Ted Armel, Rose Bailey, David Barkan, Philip Bartmaster, Beverly Glassoff Berman, Bernice Bernstein, Beatrice Blackman, Estelle Bloomfield, Jack Broder, Jean Brissell, Gertrude Bubar, Nat Bubar, Esther Kellen, Maurice Chair, Francine Chernoff, David Cohn, Florence Cohn, Ann Cooper, Judy Corman, Anson Dreisen, Judy Eder, Gary Finkel, Eli Fishman, Seema Frankel, Bertha Friedman, Renee Bowden Friedman, Rozelle Cohn Friedman, Harry Golden, Nathaniel Goldstein, Edie Gordon, Minnie Gordon, Charlie Grace, Betty Greenberg, David Greenberg, James Greenwald, Carlotta Gertworth, Edith Glynn, Marvin Ginn, Jay Allen Hanover, Renee Dunya Hawley, Eric Hershkovitz, Dora Hodes, Francis Lesman, Iraj Kahanasa, Zvi Carney, Najat Gotten, Andrew David Kent, Richard Lance Kirshner, Eric Clapper, Morton Kleinberg, Edward Liash, Sal Leventhal, Jane Letwin, Mort Lowy, Sylvia Lurie, Cyan Mahani, Arthur Malin, Estelle Markowitz, Seymour Markowitz, Mildred Brick Mayer, Robert Mendelson, Carol Miller, Jay Maloney, Emmanuel Morkey, Max Neiman, Arthur Pearl, Spencer Pritikin, Edward Maurice Regal, Hermo Rogerio, Belle Reamer, Rosangela Lucienne Rinsky, Lester Riskin, Jack Robbins, Dora Levy Roddy, Ruth Rosenberg, Arnold Rosenzweig, Alan Rawson, Janice Ruda, James London Shendling, Barbara Silvers, Isaac Skluth, Adrian Sobel, Bessie Sommer, Maya Stark, Jack Stillerman, Annette Sussman, Valerie Wolf, Joan Seligson. If there are any other names to be added at this point, please speak those names aloud. We now bring to mind all of those whose names we mentioned, those who died in defense of the United States, those who died in defense of the state of Israel, those who were killed through senseless acts of terror, those who have no one to say Kaddish for them. We join together in Kaddish. Yitgadal,
Yishkadal.
V'yitkadash,
Rabbi, Yalma,
Divra,
Yirute,
Yirute,
Yamli, Malhute, the Chayekon,
V'yomechon,
Uvachaye, the Kal Beit Yisrael,
Israel, Ba'agala, V'yislam Koriv,
Imru,
Amen.
Yehei,
Yehei Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya, V'chayim,
Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael,
All Yisrael.
Imru,
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. I am having so many glitches here. Okay. Yitbarach v'yishtabach
Tabak V'yipor,
v'yitar
V'yitamam,
v'yitromam
V'yinaseh,
v'yinaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalav
Allow Shemay to
Meir kudusha brichu
Rifu,
le'ela minchol birchata v'shirata tushbachata
V'nechemata,
v'nechamata
Da'amiran
da'amiran
V'yalma V'yiru, Amen.
Yehei Shlama
Shlama
Rabba Min Shemaya
V'chayim,
V'chayim Aleinu
Aleinu V'al
Kol
Kol
Yisrael
Yisrael, V'imru,
V'imru
Amen.
Oseh
Shalom,
Lo
Roma,
Bibroma
Hu Ya'aseh Shalom,
Oseh Shalom
Aleinu.
Aleinu
Aleinu V'al
All
Kol
Yisrael.
V'imru, Amen.
May I have no right to do it, but from Tamara's perspective as well. Thank you so much for welcoming us back for this day of study. I enjoyed it thoroughly, and I hope that you did as well, and that you'll continue with Donna Shapiro and others who will be don't make faces who will continue being your teachers, and there will be rabbis from Wilshire who will join as well. So
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Tamara.
just thanks. Thanks to everybody. And
Shabbat Shalom.
you don't know how much,
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Have a blessed week.
Tamara,
so much.
you get the last word. Tamara,
Shabbat shalom.
no last word. Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good to see
Thank
you.
you. Have a great Shabbat and a great week.
You too, Rabbi. Shabbat shalom.